And all right, so again, welcome everybody to the mental wellness seminar here in October 2021. My name is Noel Ramirez, and I am from Mango Tree Counseling and Consulting. And today's topic is going to be about sex, Asian American identity, some tools and resources. So before we get started, just a little message from our sponsors. Mango Tree Counseling and Consulting. We are a group mental health practice here in the Philadelphia metro area, serving the state of Pennsylvania. We are AAPI focused mental health treatment. We also have a strong commitment towards providing programming, intersectional programming. And if you want to learn a little bit more about us, mangotreecc.com. We currently have a couple of languages on board. We've got some Mandarin speakers, Cantonese speakers, we have Filipino speakers, Bangla speakers, Urdu, Hindi speakers, and I believe I'm missing another one, but learn more about us at mangotreecc.com. Every second Thursday, we have mental wellness seminars that are free and open to the public, specifically the AAPI community. So we are usually have these wellness seminars that talk about different topics that concern mental health wellness issues. Every quarter we do different groups, and I think the end of this month, I believe it's October 28th, I have a flyer for this. We have a South Asian listening circle to kind of talk about the unique issues that impact the South Asian community when it comes to mental health issues. Again, every second Thursday, tune in. These are recorded, so if you can't make it, you can also check us out on YouTube. So a little bit about today's presentation. We're going to talk about frameworks on love and sex. Folks have been bringing this up to us a lot, and so different types of frameworks. And I want to press pause for a second, like to explain what a framework is, because we use this word a lot. And how I like to describe framework is life throws a bunch of stuff at you: emotions, thoughts, feelings, thoughts that maybe you weren't even thinking about. And frameworks are ways to organize some of the stuff that's being thrown at you. So today, there's a lot of stuff about sex. There's a lot of stuff about love that maybe we're struggling with, confused about. Hopefully these frameworks can help organize some of that. We're going to talk about sex specifically as it pertains to AAPI identity. We're also going to talk a little bit about some AAPI cultural implications when it comes to sex and Asian American identities. And towards the end, we're going to have a small group discussion. So we're going to break folks up into small groups so folks can talk a little bit about what this was and create some community. So I have a question for folks. Maybe I'm asking for a friend. What were some of the messages you received from your family about sex? Feel free to write this in the chat. I won't say your name, I will share some of the responses. I want you to think about you, a person in the AAPI community, and of course, intersectional identities, heterosexual, queer, non-binary, gender variant, all of that. I want to know, what were some of the messages that you received about sex explicitly? So just take a second, and when you have a response, kindly put it in the chat box because we want to know. I'll share for me. I didn't get a lot of messaging around sex. I think the message I got was to not do it, and to to not only not do it, but to not get caught doing it. So that was often the messaging that I got. There was it wasn't talked about. So some folks write specific conversations about femmes, Asian femmes and women, and sexuality. Sex can cause bad grades, which would be unacceptable. Yeah, you know, I really I resonate with that. My mother and father, hi mom and dad, would say things like, just focus on schoolwork. Like whenever it was a topic that brought vulnerability, love, sex, friendships, the remedy was often schoolwork. Just focus on school. And then when I was done with school, it became focus on work. So it was often this thing to avoid. Someone wrote, sex is for adults. Don't do it until you're over 18 and only with a man that you're serious with. This was a message from outside of my family. Marriage before sex. Don't have sex until you're married. don't go around kissing boys. I don't really get any info on sex directly, but I think this was an indirect way for my parent to say no sex before marriage. Yeah, I really resonate with that. Sex was communicated. I don't know if this resonates with folks. For me, it was communicated through a series of warnings, right? It was never just direct information. It was a series of warnings. Gender queer trans here. When I was a kid, my mom told me not to masturbate, to not be a queer person or lesbian person. It will make your like chronic conditions even worse. Sex was never discussed in my family. The only spheres in which it was brought up was in church. And someone talks about growing up in a Korean Presbyterian church, and they spoke negatively on it. Strong physical and emotional bond from family. Don't shame the family. Sex is shameful. Don't watch porn. Queer people are different in a bad way. My parents walked in on me and my partner, girlfriend, intimate but not sex, and they stopped talking to her directly. It sounds like a nightmare. Seconding on the masturbation, touching myself was for bad girls and was nasty. Family, don't talk about sex. My mom didn't even talk to me about getting my period. So what I'm sensing some themes just to pay attention to. We see a lot of silences. We see a lot of warnings, some shame stuff. Some folks had direct communication, and some parts of our community, church, school, what have you, were ways in which information about sex was disseminated. Kind of curious, another question is, what were some of the messages you received from your family about love? And this is an interesting question. I'd like to ask this for folks because it explores how people talk, how people have emotional communication. So I'm curious about, how do people talk about love? You have to love yourself before you can love someone else. Can I get an amen, RuPaul? Anyway, maybe I'm the only one that got that one. But yes, loving yourself before you can love someone else. Any other messages? There's a family type love and a romantic type love. Okay. My question to that is often, what happens when you are in a family? Does it change? And in some couples, sometimes it does. Again, don't shame the family by bringing someone socially undesirable to the family. So this person is noting, we're talking about class, we're talking about race, we're talking about the partner choice here. And underneath that, not to shame the family, maybe just a thought, can be the sense of obligation, right? Um, my parent, I'll use myself as an example, there was always this prescribed gender role. So it wasn't about love, it was about the function of a marriage or a relationship. And it would always be like, men are providers, you must provide. And then she would, my pronouns are he, him. My sibling identifies she, her. She would then tell my sibling, you must have your own money because you can't depend on a man. So it's interesting, like mixed messages around expectations, but love was sometimes not often discussed in that case. Some folks wrote, uh, men don't love, they only use women for sex. Smart women know this. Romantic love doesn't exist. Marriages are built on responsibility. Parental love is real. Was never discussed. It was shown through action as an adult after I moved to the U.S. and my parents moved to the U.S. But my parents never talked about love. Um, yeah, I don't recall my parents ever talking about love. As an adult, I realized love was shown by action. I've realized people sometimes would show love through sarcasm and humor versus actually saying love. Love is sacrifice. Yeah, I feel like that was the number one hit in my house. We do this because we love you. It was always like a declaration of, we work overtime because we love you. I was like, I don't know about that. Or maybe it's true. Rarely have I ever seen my parents show any physical affection to each other or even verbalize I love you. Love was not expressed verbally, maybe more through actions. One person wrote, "You don't display your affection even with family. It's supposed to be private. Love isn't talked about. You show it through serving each other. You say, 'I love you' on special occasions." I love this. This kind of reminds me of some traditions where love is demonstrated through honor and indebtedness versus verbal expression. Um, so that's an observation I've seen in some families. My family didn't talk about love. We didn't even say "I love you" to each other. Um, you can show them through your action. Family is love. Uh, Family's supposed to love each other no matter what. So kind of like a loyalty. Uh, oh my God, love expressed as something owed. Yes. Indebtedness, I think is an element of that, or honor, or in some cultures, there's like a phrasings around what you're owed. And that's a function of a component of love or the loving relationship. So great topics. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. And let's just get into the meat of it. So if we're going to talk about sex and love, the first thing I really want to make sure is articulated very clearly is both of these things, sex and love, requires consent. Consent, consent, consent. I want to create a culture where when we talk about mental wellness, that we talk about consent. So consent is really important. I attached this really fun article called 35 Sexy Ways to Ask for Consent. And there are ways to be sexy about it. Um, People ask for consent all the time when it comes to certain things, and when it comes to sex. So check out this article. One sort of approach to mental wellness from the jump is creating a culture of communication and consent. So again, I just want to put that out there right away, right from the jump. Consent is a must when we talk about sex and love. So let's talk about sex. I feel like that. I don't know if anyone had this person in their family. I feel like that older cousin that's like, let me tell you about something. Let me tell you about sex. Like, this is how some people talk about their learnings of sex. But here is a mental wellness topic, and we're going to talk about how sex impacts folks. And so here's one framework. I'm going to start with just talking about the older cousin, the rebellious older cousin who's like smoking a candy cigarette outside. Um, or maybe that's just my family. So amazing sex. So these are what some sexperts say about what amazing sex should be: being present and focus, connection or being in sync, sexual intimacy, closeness, right? Open and clear communication, authenticity, healing, and transformation. People describe sex as a transformative act. And some people talk about vulnerability and surrender. And so, a lot of folks, especially when they talk about things like this in therapy, I think a lot of folks will sometimes ask, like, what is the optimal sex? And this isn't the be all and end all. This is just one sexpert talking about sex. When we talk about vulnerability and surrender, we talk about pleasure. Quickly, this book, shout out to the author, Dr. Emily Nagoski. Um, how do people move towards intimacy? And this is what a sex therapist says about sex. So mature and secure sex focuses on sensuality. It's less of a race to the finish line and more of an appreciation of the process that's here. Um, for some folks, it's less about orgasm or ejaculation, which sometimes is confused as that is what sex is when this happens, or when that happens, it's over, it's done. We can wrap it up, no pun intended, right? Um, but it's more than that. Erotic connection with a partner. Cuddling or sensual massage is part of this sort of mature and secure sex. And this note of deeper, more intense orgasms. So I'm curious, folks could free associate throughout this talk. Um, uh, what are folks' thoughts about this notion of mature and secure sex? Um, does this, and these are some questions to ask ourselves, are these regular practices that we engage in? If we are engaging in sex, are these messages that we are these aligned with some of the messages that we get around sex growing up and also in our here and now realities? I talked to some folks about hookup culture. Is this in alignment with hookup culture? Um, does the types of sex we have prioritize bodies, our bodies, and the bodies of others? So these are some questions to sort of think a little bit about. And this is another framework of looking at how and what intimate, secure sex can look like. Oops, sorry, folks. Another important element, and I think this is particularly helpful for folks who are figuring out their sexual subjectivity, or when I talk to couples about like how to get back in line with one another, aligned with folks' sexual subjectivity. And when I say sexual subjectivity, I mean who you are as a sexual person, what it is that you like, not like, and even just what is your pleasure style. And so initiation style, who knew? There are so many different initiation styles. There is the makeout style, the passion style. Some people really prefer to be kind of adored and desired. Sapiodynamic style, people prefer to be teased to heighten their sexual energy. Sensualist style, these people prefer to be touched, feeling different sensations. Some people talk about a connection, like really need a heartfelt and emotional connection for there to be initiation towards intimacy and sexual activity. Some people like verbal style, people saying things, sexting, um, telling people what they want to do. And some people particularly like power styles. These people prefer using power as a tool in the relationship or the dynamic and to turn it up a notch to create some intensity. So yeah, initiation styles are something to consider when we're even thinking about our own sexual subjectivity, getting to know our own interests and wants. And if you're in a relationship, maybe something to consider and think a little bit about, or multiple relationships. But initiation is another area that we talk a little bit in when we look at relational dynamics as well as our own sexual subjectivity. I saw this in a training. I thought it was really cute. So I just put it in here. Shout outs to Pessy in the training. Um, this is called the sleepy hedgehog. And so what are some tools and frameworks about sex and sexuality? One of the things that folks talk a lot about is having confidence and joy. But how do you have confidence and joy when your hedgehog is asleep? And what is a hedgehog? Well, if you look at the visual, you can probably figure out it could be multiple things. That could be a lot of different things. But let's look at some of the different ways in which we can create more confidence and joy amongst the sleepy hedgehog. Give it a name. Some people name this part of their bodies. Names are beautiful. They give character. They personalize things. Sit peacefully with it in your lap. Figure out, if you're somebody who's playing with the hedgehog, what it needs, what it wants, what it responds to, and tell your partner about the needs so you can collaborate. So again, communication and collaborating on specific bits and parts of our bodies, so critical when it comes to creating a mutual sexual experience. This is another one. Penises are like puppies. Boy, are they glad to see you, but they respond poorly to commands. And the more aggressive you get with your commands, unless you're interested in the power play, the more they'll cower and hide, waiting for you to calm down. But if you're playful and affectionate with them, there's nothing they won't do for you. So again, thinking about different ways to engage different body parts, different things that people have. People sometimes will ask, like, well, what do I do with this or that? Here's just another suggestion and a posture. Again, when we talk about sex in the here and now, particularly in Asian American communities, there's like this theme of taboo. People aren't supposed to talk about it. It's forbidden, but that has not always been the case. We see the nourishing life texts in medieval China talk a lot about satisfaction, euphoria, and sexuality. The Kama Sutra, we look at this as eroticism and emotional fulfillment in South Asia years and years ago. Shout out to the Philippines. Pre-colonial Philippines valued polygamy, but this was kind of like somewhat problematic, but Just put that out there. And encourage unmarried women who were older to participate freely in sexual activities. Very much a departure from today. And many cultures created and cultivated a space for gender variance. So we see that even just pre-colonization, there are different norms and values, and a critical consciousness to pay attention to is how some of these shame narratives have been introduced through colonization. This is something to consider. Maybe we can talk about that in another talk. Again, I wanted to share just some quick sexual health resources. When we talk about sexual health, there's something called PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis. I'm sure most folks have heard of it, but if you haven't, it's a medication. There's actually two types of medications that's taken once a day for folks who want to prevent HIV transmission. So when folks take the medication, they are, if they were exposed, let's say they were having sex with someone who's virally unsuppressed and were exposed with the virus without, maybe there wasn't a condom involved, this is another safety net strategy in preventing HIV transmission. We also talk about birth control, different types of ways and mechanisms with that. There are two different types of condoms. They call it male and female condoms. I don't love the name, but there are two types of different condoms. One is smaller than the other, and one can be tucked into a particular area. And also, when it comes to sexual health and talking to your medical providers, we recommend that folks, I used to tell folks, triple screen. So wherever there's been traffic in your body, make sure that there's a swab there, because that lets us know where things are at. Gender affirming treatment can be done by primary care providers. Again, there's other very, very important folks to be speaking with. OBGYN care, colorectal surgeons are really helpful to really explore if there's any anal sex activity, if there's any HPV or any other fun things going on, and also fertility care. So again, creating your committee, knowing what supplies you've got. I also just want to put a shout out for lube, making sure that that's part of your equation here, and lots of different stuff here. Quickly, some important text. Planned Parenthood has a lot of conversation around sex pleasure, sexual dysfunction, and masturbation. Here's a resource on positive sexuality, resources and whatnot to take a look at. ASECT is a national organization that has a bunch of different sexual health resources. And also, if you want to learn a little bit more about mental health stuff outside of Mango Tree, there's this great resource, Asian Mental Health Collective. Check it out. Here are some topics that we want to talk about, but we just simply don't have enough time today. Sigh. And these come up. Asian fetish, looking at colonial history, hyperfem and emasculations around gender expression, sexual dysfunction and body work, really talking about things on dysfunction and functioning of sexual dynamics, sexual trauma and recovery. This topic comes up a lot. How do I engage in my sexual subjectivity if I have a history of sexual trauma, and what does that recovery process look like? Hookup culture, something that comes up a lot when you're swiping right, swiping left, doing this and that. Like, what does that look like? What comes up, and what are the behavioral health implications there? Anal sex, lots of people like it, and that's awesome. And so there's different things to consider when it comes to anal sex. I used to do a lot of anal sex workshops on talking about different things, and so lots of different topics, and that comes up a lot in different conversations. Masturbation, to talk about more about connecting with the body. Erotic connection, how do we define it? Sexual subjectivity, again, who we are as sexual beings. LGBT queer sexuality, again, I want to do a shout out to one of the groups that I'm involved with more personally, Queer Philadelphia Asian and Queer, or PAC, phillyasianqueer.com. Check them out. Local resource here in Philadelphia. I want to shift quickly to love, because that is also a topic that we talk a lot about, not only in therapy, but also amongst each other. So there is this 7 stages at a glance of relationships. It's called marriage, and there's this article. It's like a Reader's Digest article that you can take a look at. It leans heteronormative and very cis. So I'm going to like expand this a little bit. Whenever we're working with folks in relationships, or if you're in your relationship, sometimes the tensions and conflicts have themes. And these are the different themes. So in the beginning of relationships, I want you to consider these all 7 stages, and each stage has a final exam. The first stage in any relationship is passion. There's a lot of intensity. People are really very interested in having sex with each other. And the final exam in passion is there more to this than just sexual connection, right? Like, do I like him more? Or do I like her more? Or do I like them more? Or is this just like a F boy thing? I just learned about that. F boy. I didn't know that that was like a thing. But anyway, it's a thing. Realization. So this is usually, not always, around like 2 years. And 2 years in relationships, there's something called limerence, and sometimes the sex drive, sometimes, not all the time, comes down a little bit, and we move into realization. And realization is when people are really having arguments around communication, frustration, annoyance. You get to learn that maybe your partner is always late, maybe your partner is messy. And so the final exam in realization is, can we create a system of communication to talk about disappointments, hopes, and hurts? And a lot of conflicts and tensions come underneath that. Rebellion. Some people talk about this being in the 7-year mark. That's not always the case. And rebellion is when people struggle going from me to we. I'll give you an example. You're out at the club. For those of us at a certain age, maybe that's 8 o'clock. For some of you, it might be 11 o'clock. And it's getting late. You live with your partner. And that moment is, do I text them? Yes or no? The yes part is like, yeah, because we're in a relationship. Like, I want to make sure they know that where I'm at and they're not waiting up. The no part, man, screw that. Like, I don't owe anyone anything. That right there is the quintessential rebellion piece here. How do we go from me to we and the struggles towards that? Cooperation is when there's a project that's involved and people really struggle with schedules, workflows. The final exam is, how do we create a workflow that honors both of us? Reunion, this is when the project is over. Can couples come together? A lot of divorces happen when kids go to college. Why? This is where we see the reunion. Explosion can happen at any time, and again, this doesn't have to be linear, but explosion can happen at any time. It could be loss of a job, it could be health issues, it could be someone dying, it could be foreclosure, something, home renovation project. I've been through that one. And explosion is, will this relationship be a place of stress or solace during this moment of explosion? And then completion is, um, we're meant to be, right? Kind of the most boring of the stages. But essentially, when we're looking and evaluating our relationships and love relationships, sometimes, not all the times, they can go through these different stages. Sometimes you can be in the same stage. It all depends. But this is just another framework to explore this. I want to briefly go over this. Healthy relationships. This is called a sound relationship house. And I really want to point to the walls of a house. So the point of the walls of a house is to protect the integrity and structure of the home. You can see what's inside there, but without trust and commitment, without walls to a house, you're exposed to all the outer limits. So when we look at love and healthy relationships, we're really looking at trust and commitment, building trust and commitment, but then looking at love maps, knowing each other's worlds, sharing fondness and admiration, turning towards each other versus away, really looking at positive perspectives, managing conflict, learning how to accept people's feelings, dialogue about problems, and also taking care of ourselves. And most of all, at the top, creating shared meaning. Does the relationship have shared meaning? Do folks have shared values? So again, this is just one framework. When we look at relationships, how do we evaluate it? Where are the areas that maybe we want to enhance or strengthen? What are things that might be missing? The Gottmans are relationship scholars, and they study this stuff all the time. They actually have something called the Love Lab, so it's something to check out. I also want to point this out. It's the Four Horsemen of the relationships. It's another tool that we talk to folks about in relationships. There are 4: criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. Criticism is criticizing and attacking the person, and really underneath criticism are unexpressed wants and needs. Defensiveness is not being able to take responsibility. Blaming, always blaming. Contempt is disgust, really seeing somebody as less than. We see this in like sarcasm, in like the heavy sigh, like the kind of just disgust with the other person, and stonewalling. I think these are really helpful in relationships, but also with your relationships with work. I've seen this with relationships with family members, with relationships also with yourself. The four horsemen typically come to relationships when there's a low relationship bank account. And so ways to enhance the relationship is what they talk about with their antidotes: using a gentle startup, taking responsibility when something comes up. Contempt is creating a culture of appreciation and wants, describing our feelings and our needs. And stonewalling is taking a break. Hey, I can't talk about this now, but I want to talk about this with you in an hour. Like really creating some self-soothing and a timed break. So again, Four Horsemen relationships, another framework and tool to utilize in understanding this love stuff. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about this: turning away, turning towards, away, and against. In relationship, there's always bids for connection. And what is a bid? A bid is any attempt to create intimacy. Are we, the question becomes, are we turning towards the bid, away, or against? And this is something to pay attention to. It's a behavioral presentation, and it's something only we can answer. And I also think that this is important to think about when it comes to our own relationships with ourselves and others. So key takeaways from this seminar are the importance of turning towards. Remembering pleasure is a measure. And also all of these relationship frameworks, we're talking about love and sex, but all of these can also be a part of your own relationship with your own self. How do these measure up in your world? So some really important things to keep in mind. Finally, just a brief promotion. Next month, we will be doing another wellness seminar called Drama and Trauma, Frameworks and Coping, and a whole lot of venting when it comes to families, because November is a time when a lot of families come together. And again, I want to give another shout out to our folks, Zara and Joanne, our therapists here at Mango Tree Counseling and Consulting. And on October 28th at 8 p.m., they will be doing a South Asian listening circle. And it's for South Asian folks to talk about the mental health dynamics that come up in the South Asian diaspora. So if you're interested, check it out. October 28th, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So in our small groups, we're going to break folks up into small groups. I'm going to stop recording, but in your small groups, I want you to think a little bit about reflections. What were some norms? What does sex mean to you? And also what came up for you? Maybe just a place of reflection. So I will stop the recording and I will do